Today we're talking about cleaning and maintenance. Now you might think, oh, that's a bit boring, I might skip this one, but please don't. It's super important. Not taking care of this stuff properly is a massive gamble, and there are some significant downsides. At best, you're going to make your coffee taste bad. And what a waste if you bought some nice coffee beans to put them into dirty equipment to make the shots or the brews taste harsh and bitter. That's not okay. But maintenance, perhaps even more important. Now, it might be that you finally have achieved your dream setup. You want to keep that running perfectly for decades. Or it might be that you're on your way to your dream setup, and you might be thinking at some point, well, I'll sell this and upgrade later. If you want to sell it for decent money, it needs to be well maintained. And that's what we're going to cover today. And I will say, read the manual. Most manufacturers will cover quite a lot in decent detail, so please do read the manual. They're all for free online as PDFs. You can just search your piece of equipment and manual and PDF. It'll be there somewhere, but there is more. And we felt a little bit like there wasn't quite enough, and so we actually approached a bunch of manufacturers with extra questions, and we'll try and give you the summary of all of it, the tips, the tricks, the essential stuff to keep your kit tasting good and working beautifully. We're going to cover 4 categories of coffee equipment today. First up will be espresso machines, the most expensive, perhaps the most complex, perhaps the most deserving of maintenance of all the kit that you'll buy. Then we'll cover coffee grinders of all types. Then we'll talk about coffee brewers, little batch brewers, those kind of things. They need a little bit of love and care too. And we'll finish with a few little other bits and pieces of coffee equipment that may benefit from a little cleaning and maintenance. Let's start with espresso machines. I should disclose, my brain might be slightly broken by my time spent in the coffee industry thinking about cleanliness in espresso machines in cafes. That is a different world. If you're doing 500 drinks a day, the machines are going to need a different kind of schedule. Cleanliness is so important, and so I'm kind of a bit more obsessed with it, I think, as a result of that. Let's ignore for now the outside of these things and their magnetic attraction to fingerprints, and let's focus on things that affect the taste of coffee. The Grouphead in here. Starting with a portafilter. It's pretty easy. A portafilter like this, obviously your basket should be clean at all times. If you're struggling to get your basket out, don't forget you can always just use a little teaspoon, wedge it in here, and it will just pop out. Keep this basket nice and clean every single day. There's no reason not to give this a clean. Obviously, every time you pull a shot, the inside should be clean, but the outside too. A lot of people prefer what are called naked portafilters, where the bottom of this is chopped off, like this, because there's less to clean. The inside of this should sort of pass what I would call the finger test, where you should rub your finger on the inside of that, look at it, and not be disgusted by what you find. If what has come off here is an accumulation of old coffee and is disgusting, you're not cleaning frequently enough. I would say a little soap, a little dish soap is totally okay. At the sink, a sponge or a sort of soft scourer. Make sure anything that's in here is off at least weekly. But generally, anytime I'm done with a session of making espresso, I just want to get rid of anything in there. If I leave it, and I leave this in a machine and the machine is hot, any retained liquid will kind of cook down, evaporate out, and deposit soluble material, and that will get more and more disgusting over time. I just want to get rid of it. If you've gotten to the point where things have gone quite wrong and it's accumulated a significant amount here, then yes, under those circumstances, I'd say it's okay to give this a soak. Get some very hot water, dissolve a teaspoon of espresso machine cleaner, and suspend it only, sort of dip it in up to here. Don't get your handle in there, obviously, and let it soak for an hour or overnight, and then it will come off more easily, any sort of retained dirt. But keep this beautiful and clean. Think of it as a frying pan. You want to cook every time you cook a meal in a fresh, clean frying pan, not one that still has yesterday's dinner remnants inside it. Now let's talk about group heads. In almost all machines, there's going to be a shower screen up here that disperses water over the coffee. Taking that down frequently is very useful. My minimum frequency for a regularly used machine would be every week. I see no reason not to take it down more frequently than that if you want to do that. Again, it should pass the sort of ick test where you take it down and you shouldn't be disgusted by what you find. This one has a little flathead screw in the middle. Other machines have a little Phillips head. Some have bolts. You can get tools to help drop them down. Now, in some machines, it'll just be a screen, and some, there'll be a block too. So we'll take that screw out there. This is the shower screen, and coffee tends to accumulate here behind it. You can see in this one, there's some coffee accumulated. We let it build up. This, to me, would definitely be tasteable in my espresso, this amount of ground coffee here. It would be adding bitterness and harshness to the finish, and I would want to get rid of it, and my cleaning schedule is not frequent enough for my tastes if I'm seeing this much coffee accumulated here. Things like puck screens slow the accumulation of coffee around shower screens, but ultimately it's so little work and it's so easy to take this just to a sink, give it a scrub, clean it up. Again, a little bit of dish soap is fine, rinse it out completely. Some machines may have dispersion blocks. Again, you can see a little bit of coffee is accumulating on here slowly. It sort of passes my disgusted test, but I wouldn't want any more coffee accumulated on this before it was cleaned. When these are down, you can also get in there and just wipe clean the dispersion sort of block up here where the water's coming from. Again, coffee will slowly accumulate here. It's pretty easy to clean off, and again, it's about as easy as it will be to clean the gasket that's up there too. Now it's time to talk about back flushing. And before we get into it, we need to get technical, just briefly, and talk about the way that some machines work. A lot of espresso machines have what's called a solenoid valve on them, or a three-way valve more accurately. One way is the water coming from the boiler, so your hot, fresh water ready to brew espresso. Another sort of route for the valve is to the coffee, and the third route is to the waste. When the machine is in a normal state, the valve is closed, and so water cannot leave the boiler, but the tube from the coffee to the waste is kind of open as a pathway. When you brew, it closes the tube to the waste and opens the one from the boiler, so water flows from the boiler to the coffee. Espresso brewing happens under pressure, and at the end of a shot, when you press stop, that pressure is released due to this three-way valve. It can go back up the way it came, gets stopped by the stopper, so it can't go into the boiler, but it can go then down to the waste. This means at the end of every shot of espresso, some, let's call it coffee water, gets shot up inside the machine through a tube that's very hot on the way to the waste. And it will deposit some coffee solubles on that little tube that goes from the valve to the coffee. It's the kind of two-way street of the coffee machine. Some machines have very long two-way streets, or relatively long, some much shorter. But either way, when you're back flushing, this is the part of the machine that you're primarily worrying about. Everything else, the screen, the dispersion block, you should have already cleaned. How dirty this gets depends on a number of factors, and so therefore how frequently you should clean it depends on those factors too. Again, for me, as a bare minimum, it would be once a week. Espresso machine cleaner is relatively cheap. You don't need very much to do a good job, and it's simple and easy to use, and it's an investment of a couple of minutes of your time. The rewards are there. A machine cannot be too clean. It very easily can be too dirty. You can mitigate the need for cleaning by always flushing the group head as soon as you've finished pulling a shot. The shot stops, and that pressure sends that coffee water back up into the tube. Immediately take your portafilter out and flush it. That will bring clean water through and drag out a lot of that before it starts to deposit. Now, this is particularly important under one specific circumstance, which is you've pulled a shot that's flowing way too slow, we call it choking almost, and you stopped it to kind of try again, change your grind setting, change your dose, and fix it. In those circumstances, the liquid that you've shot inside the machine is significantly stronger. It's got way more soluble material in it than the end of a normal espresso where that water is relatively weak. Just flush it out as soon as you can, and a good 5-second flush is fine to prevent that accumulation. Now, all this talk about maintenance, about investing a little bit of time and effort to get some great results, well, it makes me think of something. And I'll tell you about it during this short ad for this video's sponsor, which is Trainwell. Now, Trainwell is a fitness app that pairs you one-on-one with your own personal fitness coach. You might have known them as Copilot. I'll explain the name change in a minute. I've been using it for about a year now, and the results for me have been incredible. It's not that I'm stronger than before, that my body composition has improved, or even that my VO2 max has increased, and yes, I did check that. It's that my goal was to make exercise a regular and sustainable part of my daily life. And that's happened. I really look forward to exercising. It's not a chore, it's a highlight of my day. And I think Trainwell has helped in three main ways. Firstly, accountability. There's a real person. As part of the name change, they don't want to associate with kind of AI chatbot Copilot services. This is a real person, a real expert that I can talk to. And actually at the start, you have a short call where you introduce yourself to each other, talk about how you want to train, what you want to do, what your goals are, and everything's set up from there. So being accountable to a person, super important to me. 2, flexibility. My schedule is frankly a mess, and this works around my schedule, not around my trainer's schedule. And 3, customization. What I was interested in focusing on a year ago has changed. I'm not stuck with a program I downloaded from the internet. This evolves because there is an expert at the other end. I wanted to add in some running with a twist of using minimalist shoes. Well, Selena has been through that journey herself and gave me great advice to get started. If you want to check it out, then use the link in the description down below. You can get a 14-day free trial of your own personal fitness coach. Thank you again to Trainwell for sponsoring this video. To clean properly, again, think about what you're actually doing. I'm kind of brand agnostic around espresso machine cleaner. I use Onex quite often, but Pulicaf is good. There's a bunch of other brands out there. I don't like the tablets because I find the dose to be too high and a kind of waste of detergent. If you're cleaning frequently, tiny amount is really enough. This should last you a very long time. If you think about the cleaning process, when you lock this in and you push go, hot water is flowing from the boiler into here. There's a blank basket in this, so it can't go anywhere. It begins to dissolve the detergent, and when you press stop, that's when cleaning begins, because that's when that pressure will drag the detergent up into the machine. Leaving it to do its job is very important. So in a funny sort of way, once you start cleaning, it's the time that the machine is off that is much more effective than the time that the pump is on and trying to push water in. Generally, you'll see people be like 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off, repeat 5 times. But you could do 10 seconds on the first time, 10 seconds off, and then shorter ons and longer offs, and be just as effective. When you're done, rinse it out, rinse it clean, make sure there's no detergent left in here, and then make sure that the water coming out looks and smells clean, and you're done. When it comes to cleaning, the only other bit of an espresso machine to really worry about is the Steamwand. Now, I would say regular and good habits of purging the wand at the end of steaming milk and wiping it thoroughly immediately with a wet cloth mean that you shouldn't have to do any frequent maintenance beyond that to your Steamwand. But sometimes some people maybe aren't that good at that stuff, and you need to do some additional cleaning. I would say, and I would recommend very strongly, if you have an accumulation of milk, dried milk solids around the holes of the Steamwand, take the tip of the Steamwand off. You might need a little spanner. They will all unscrew pretty much, and then you can soak that in some hot water and detergent and clean it out. I don't like the idea of you soaking the entire wand like that. It's highly unlikely anything bad would happen, but in cafe scenarios I have seen over the years, people do that, switch off the machine, and a poor seal of the Steamwand has turned that into a drinking straw, and it's pulled milky, disgusting water back inside its own steam boiler, and that's very bad. So I would say always, always, always remove the tip of the Steamwand for cleaning. The rest of it on cleaning is really then aesthetics. Make sure it looks nice and clean. Don't let mold grow in your drip tray. You know who you are. Don't do that. But apart from that, nothing's really going to impact the taste of your coffee from a cleanliness perspective. What we're going to talk about now is probably the most stressful, frustrating, difficult part of this whole video, and it's descaling. Water for coffee is a complex world. The best water for coffee's taste may not always completely align with the best water for the longevity of your machine. And there's 2 ways that water can affect your machine. The most common way is that water can be scale forming. It's got a lot of calcium bicarbonate in there, and that will form calcium carbonate, which is limescale, and that will accumulate inside your machine and eventually break it. Descaling it is usually done by adding water with acid dissolved into it to break down the limescale. You can actually have water that is corrosive. Under certain circumstances, water's chemistry can mean it will damage a machine. I would say if you're concerned about this, I want to know more. It's a complex world, but you can use things like Langolier index calculators online, where you can input a bunch of details about your water's chemistry, and it will tell you if it's likely scale forming or likely corrosive, or hopefully happily in the middle and not doing anything bad whatsoever. When it comes to descaling a machine, there's kind of 2 approaches, and shout out to John from Decent. When we contacted everyone, he gave a great answer to this. You can use what I would call the frequent descaler concentration. There, you're going to be regularly descaling your machine, and there's going to be pretty limited scale buildup inside it, if there is any, and so you can use a relatively low acid concentration. There, it might be anywhere from 2 to 5% acid sort of by weight. If you're in a scale forming area, your water's quite hard, you haven't descaled for a couple of years, you run a really serious risk where if you add gentle descaler to that, well, it could just loosen some flakes of scale that could travel through the machine and clog a sort of a very narrow part of it. A lot of machines have what are called flow restrictors in them to sort of slow the flow and add some pre-infusion. They may be 0.6, 0.8 millimeters wide. That's the narrowest point in the machine. It's very easy for a lump of scale to clog that. And that would be bad because it's quite hard to kind of get fresh descaler in to break that down. In those circumstances, I understand it may be better to use a much higher concentration of descaler and leave it a lot longer to do its work, to hopefully break down as much scale as possible. That might be something like 20% acid by weight. You can either make your own descaler or you can buy off-the-shelf products. There's reasons for both. I like to make my own. I use this. Citric acid. It's delicious, it's organic, it's food safe, it's cheap, and it's easy to find. With this, you can make up your own concentrations very easily. Like I said, it's a percentage by weight, so if you're making a litre at 3%, you just need 30 grams of citric acid. Nice and easy. The other thing is, if you taste water coming out of a machine that still has descaler in it, it's just a little tangy, and it's totally safe to drink. So I love everything about this. However, there are machines, and I think of Gadget machines in particular, where you'll often see caution to avoid using citric acid and to use own-branded product instead, because there's concern about this causing corrosion in something like a Gadget's aluminium boiler. By and large, if a manufacturer recommends their own brand product, that's reasonably sensible. The downsides are, it's expensive. You may be tempted to use a lower concentration or dilute it down or use less than recommended, and that may get you into trouble from using too weak a solution, as we mentioned before. For something like this, I'd happily use this. For something like this thing here, I'd probably be happy to use citric acid too. It's easy, it's simple, it's good. In a low scale forming area, probably be doing it every 6 or 12 months. In a higher scale forming area, a bit more frequently than that. If your machine is new or in good condition or recently descaled, you can do a very simple test. Take out your portafilter, put a carafe underneath, and catch 30 seconds of water running freely from the group head. Let it flow, 30 seconds, weigh that. Once a machine begins to accumulate scale inside, that number will start to drop. And so every couple of months, you can be like, how's my machine doing? And for a lot of machines, you'll get a very early warning there that flow is starting to slow. That's a concern. Get on with some descaling. If you've never descaled a machine before, it's very simple. Empty your water tank out and add your descale mixture to it. Turn the machine on and begin to pump water through. You're going to try and fill the system with the acidic water, with the descaler. Once you've gotten to there, it might be that you want to let the machine heat up a little bit. Some machines may not recommend this. Do read your manual. Then you're going to switch it off and leave it for a while. That gives a chance for the acid to break down any limescale inside. And after a while, you're going to turn it back on and flush it through. And once you've flushed through everything in your water tank, get rid of any residue in there, give it a rinse out, and then fresh water in and keep pumping it through until the taste of sourness has gone. It's going to be probably at least a full tank to get it through. And that should be, if you're descaling frequently, all you need to do. But like I said, read the manual. Speaking of water tanks, don't let water sit in your tanks for too long. If you've gone away, change the water out. You know what I mean? Like, it will accumulate often a biofilm inside that can affect the taste of the water. So turning over the water in your water tanks is a good idea. In terms of other maintenance, thankfully, it's pretty limited. In a domestic scenario, you might change the gaskets that are inside the group head maybe every year. They will age and become brittle and form an imperfect seal over time, and you'll see these kind of tiers of either clear water or kind of coffee water running down the outside of your portafilter. The shower screen itself may age over time. It really depends on the quality of the build and the manufacturer and all that kind of stuff. If it's really flexing a lot, or if the mesh that sits over the metal is sort of detaching from it as well, it's not an expensive part to change, and it is worth doing. For most people, it should last a good long time, though, a year or two comfortably. But if you're pulling a lot of shots, if you're dosing higher doses too, you may see a bit more wear and tear on that shower screen. Grinders need a little bit of love too, but probably less than you think. It is important to clean them out. It does really impact performance if you don't. And so here are the essentials. First thing you're going to worry about in a coffee grinder in terms of regular maintenance is going to be the exit chute, where coffee is leaving the sort of grinder into a dosing cup, into a bin, whatever it's going to be. That exit point needs to be kept clear because coffee will slowly accumulate there. If you don't keep it clear, then coffee can't properly leave the grind chamber and you'll get some regrinding happening. That will make more fines, that will make the shots taste worse. That is to be avoided. So making sure the exit chute is clean is the number one task. And I would do that frequently. That's at least every week, keep an eye on it. In some grinders, it's more visible than others. It's obviously just underneath here. Most grinder manufacturers will give you a brush. This is what the brush is for. This little part here. We should talk briefly about hoppers. Not every grinder has a meaningful hopper that you can clean. This one doesn't really. This one really does. If you like to leave beans in a hopper over time, you should know that your cleaning needs to adapt around that, especially if there's any oils on the outside of your coffee beans. Regardless, you will see some accumulation over time from a full hopper. You'll see oils deposit on there, and they will start to taste bad. Oils, when they go rancid, smell like fish. And you don't want a fishy hopper for your coffee grinder. Regularly remove your hopper once it's empty. Take this away to the sink. Dish soap is fine. Make sure any oil is removed. Water alone will not do a good enough job. You need a little bit of detergent, not very much. Make sure it is completely dry before returning it, and back on it goes. I've seen some horror shows here, and if you've got a little bit of an accumulation inside your hopper and you don't really believe me, you're welcome to try the finger test where you grab a little bit of it, and if you're up to it, taste it. See how that goes. Where you've got sort of normal sort of built-in hoppers that don't remove, getting in there where you can with a damp cloth is probably going to be the best you can do. Just make sure nothing is building up unnecessarily. If it is really bad, you might need to remove the hopper, but that can get complex. Ideally, just keep on top of it and don't let the oil build up. Now there is the more complex topic of opening up the burr chamber and getting inside there. And here there's real variance on how easy that is and how risky that is. For me, a big divider is there some sort of threading near the burr chamber? You know, in an environment like this, where you're unscrewing something, generally a top piece, well, I do not want at any point to get ground coffee in these threads. That would be very annoying. Some grinders make it very easy to open up the burr thread, get in there and just stick the nozzle of a vacuum cleaner in there and hoover out whatever's in there, give it a little brush off first. That's great, that's lots. Some manufacturers are saying, don't even bother doing it more than every 6 to 12 months. There's not a lot of return on investment. As for the burrs, they will need changing over time, but actually the lifespan of a burr is pretty substantial. Recommendations vary quite widely. I've seen everything for domestic burrs from, say, 250 kilos up to 500 kilos. That's going to be somewhere in the region of a decade for some people to longer. And so it's not something you're going to need to do very often. There'll be loads these days of videos on YouTube about how to change a burr set, especially because people are experimenting with different burr sets rather than just changing them because the old ones have gotten a little dull. If you don't want to get in there and open up a burr set, but you do want to do some cleaning, there is one other option. These things, and they are now made by a couple of manufacturers, I think, but I think Ernex were the first ones to do it. These are designed to be ground to do the cleaning. They're little sort of pretend coffee beans that are a kind of cleaning agent. And you grind them through, like a dose of them. This is a dose recommendation depending on the grinder. Grind them as normal, and then you would need to grind through some fresh coffee afterwards to make sure you push through all of the sort of remaining material from these things. They are, as I understand them, food safe. I remember they used to eat them at trade shows when they first launched them to prove how safe they were. Didn't look tasty. But so don't worry about that. But yes, you'll need to purge out a bit of coffee. I will say, every manufacturer of grinders said, please don't use uncooked rice to clean your grinder. Please. I see it all the time. They really don't like it. You do void your warranty. Rice is actually much harder than coffee, uncooked rice. I just wouldn't do it. When burrs get dull, it's actually quite hard to tell. One manufacturer did say if they feel dull, they're dull, but I don't know how accurately I could assess the sharpness of a burr with my fingertips. So for me, the big telltales are a sudden increase in fines, that the ground coffee coming out is much hotter than usual. Those are two common clues that I would see, especially in cafes where the burrs are a little bit dull. And in those situations, firstly, I would make sure everything was nice and clean. And then if I was still having issues and the timeline kind of lined up with I've used a couple 100 kilos, maybe 300 kilos, then yes, I'd look at changing it. Kilo-based guidelines aren't that useful because not all coffee is created equal. Very dense, very light roasted coffee is much harder to grind than very dark roasted coffee. And so the lifespan of the burrs is to some extent dependent on the kind of coffee it's grinding, not just the volume of coffee that it's grinding. So from that with the grinder, just keep it looking nice. You shouldn't have to have any other sort of parts to worry about or maintain for the lifespan of these things. Let's talk just briefly about filter coffee brewers. First thing is I would probably recommend buying some espresso machine detergent. It's super useful. Anything that's touching coffee repeatedly over time will acquire some unpleasantness, and this is the best way to get rid of it. Things to worry about. In cheaper brewers like this, you'll get two things. You'll get often a little mesh thing here. Even if you're using a paper inside this or still using this just needs a soak now and again so it doesn't have any unpleasant residue on it. This you can probably clean by hand with a bit of dish soap. Probably the easiest thing. But again, if you want to be lazy, a little soak in espresso machine detergent works super well. I'm not a huge fan of glass carafes and heated plates because they make the coffee taste bad. I like stainless steel carafes that are insulated, but they easily accumulate a little bit of dirt over time. So again, hot water, just boil a kettle full of water or heat a pan on the stove. A good teaspoon of espresso machine detergent, pour in the hot water, mix, leave it for half an hour, rinse out thoroughly, and it will take away all the unpleasantness that's accumulating there. Easily done, even if you're a good person. It can happen. It can happen to you too. But done regularly, it's really no effort and it's totally worthwhile. Descaling these is still worthwhile for best possible performance. They won't suffer the same way in terms of failure that an espresso machine will, because most of the tubes and pipes in these are much wider. But still, I would recommend that sort of 2 to 5% strength descaler solution in here, and just brew it halfway through, just turn it off and turn it back on after half an hour, let it finish, and some clean water through afterwards. It's quick, it's easy, you don't have to do it very frequently, but it is worth doing. Last few bits and pieces before we wrap up. Firstly, kettles. Now ideally, like I said, you could have lovely water going in so your kettle will look brand new on the inside at all times. That's the ideal. However, in many situations, you might have a kettle that's shared usage. You use it for coffee, someone else uses it for tea, someone else doesn't care what they put inside, and you may end up with a slow accumulation of scale. This one's not too bad. Typical London kettle, far more horrifying. But descaling these is super easy. At 100% just use powdered citric acid, mix it into a little bit of water. The best bit of it is that you don't have to be that accurate, and you can just watch it happen. It's very satisfying, bubbling away, reacting, chemistry. It's exciting. And then you have a lovely crisp, clean kettle afterwards, and that's nice too. Interestingly, one manufacturer did recommend washing the inside of your kettle with like detergent. I'm not sure I'm there. So for me, just rinse it out frequently. In terms of other coffee stuff, again, treat your travel cups like carafes, so they will accumulate stuff over time. A little bit of espresso machine detergent is the way to go. Just a little bit, leave it to soak, take it right out. It will be beautiful afterwards. Mocha pots, the other one that are worth talking about. Please clean them. A patina of dirt is not a good thing. It's not seasoning, it's just dirt. Please clean your mocha pots. Aside from cleaning them regularly, the gaskets in them, the little rubber rings inside here, they do need changing. Again, if they get brittle, if you can feel that they're brittle, if locking in is an issue, if you're having any sort of pressure leaks, it's probably time for a gasket replacement. It's cheap and it's easy to do. That's the thing I think to worry about most. If you want to know why we have a sliced in half mocha pot here in the studio, well, there's a good reason, and we'll leave a link in the description down below to our mocha pot series, which will explain all. And that's it. Those are the things you have to worry about when it comes to maintenance. And I want to say thank you again to Trainwell for sponsoring this video. Don't forget you can get 14 days free with your own personal fitness expert by clicking the link down in the description below. But now I want to hear from you. Has this changed the way you're going to approach maintenance? Maybe you want to comment a few days after the video and you're cleaning a bit more. Are you tasting the difference? Is there something we missed? Is there a question that you have unanswered when it comes to maintenance that's not found in this video or in your manual? Leave us a comment down below. We'll respond if we have a good answer for you. But for now, I will say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.